Nana Shastra Vicharanai Kanipano Sadharma Samstapako Lokanam Hitakarino Tribhuvane Manyo Sharanya Karo Radha Krishna Padaravinda Bhajana Nandena Mataliko Vande Rupa Sanatana Raghuyago Shri Jiva Gopalako Vande Rupa Sanatana Raghuyago Shri Jiva Gopalako. I offer my respectful obeisances unto the six Goswamis, namely Sri Sanatan Goswami, Sri Rupa Goswami, Sri Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, Sri Raghunath Das Goswami, Sri Jiva Goswami, and Sri Gopal Bhatta Goswami, who are very expert in scrutinizingly studying all the revealed scriptures with the aim of establishing eternal religious principles for the benefit of all human beings. Thus they're honored all over the three worlds, and they're worth taking shelter of because they're absorbed in the mood of the gopis and are engaged in the transcendental loving service of Radha and Krishna. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarane Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadha Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchakapaturubhyascha kripa sindhubhya evacha paditanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Anantakoti Vaishnavrinda ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Yes. So we're going to go through chapter 19 this evening, our final evening. Before we do, for those of you who are taking Nectar of Devotion or you're taking Nectar of Devotion, taking this course for Bhakti Shastri, I want to just point out one thing from last night, which I didn't make clear enough. Didn't make clear. The second part about Rati Abbas or Bhava Abbas, the two types, Pratibimba, Chaya. Certainly it's a fact that the Pratibimba, the reflected form of Bhava Abbas, that sort of, well, you could say contaminated bhava, definitely not pure bhava, and then the chaya, the shadow or para version. Certainly it's a fact that the reflected type is clearer, you could say, stronger. Yes. And we gave the example of the reflection and a shadow and comparing them. But I couldn't even, there's definitely not a Nectar of Devotion. It is in Danadar Maharaj's book, Waves of Devotion. I would say it's definitely not clear even from Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu itself. and the commentaries of Jiva and Jiva Goswami and Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. But in your exam, let me just say that Dhanada Swami, yes, a very knowledgeable devotee and specialist to some degree in Nectar of Devotion, he says that his understanding is that in the long run, the shadow version or para, shadow version, is more helpful for progress, and is better for progress in in terms of possibly coming to bhava. Better than the reflected version. So in your exam, your examiners, not myself, but your examiners, they're going to ask you a question about that. And they're expecting that answer from you. I would say, frankly, for the long run, we should take it up, really clarify the actual point, because it's really certainly far from crystal clear. But for the exam, this is what they will expect from you. All right, so having said that, let us go on to chapter 19. And the philosophical discussion there of prema in chapter 19 is short, actually. It's short. We did mention, was it last night or the night before, that also bhava, the discussion is short, although it's 2 chapters, and like 2 fairly full chapters, and this discussion on prema is 1 chapter, and it's not really a full chapter even, really. So the point there, we did mention, the point is that the rest of the book is discussing bhava and prema, and all the details about these things. So maybe sometime in the future, I mentioned that we have done, a couple of times I've actually done a seminar on the southern part, means from chapter 22, chapter 20, I think until 30, it's either 34 or 35. It's the next side of the ocean. And it's all about these ecstasies. That's what it's about. All these ecstasies. And it's pretty amazing. It's like elevated subject matter. But, Prabhupada has presented it very nicely. So it's digestible, particularly for devotees who have been practicing for some time and who are reasonably well read in Krishna consciousness. But anyway, okay, that we'll see for the future. But here then, let's begin by, I think the best thing to do is begin by reading the first paragraph as it appears in Nectar of Devotion. When one's desire to love Krishna in one's particular relationship becomes intensified, this is known as pure love of Godhead. In the beginning, a devotee is engaged in the regulative principles of devotional service by the order of his spiritual master. When one thereby becomes completely purified of all material contamination, there develops an attachment and taste for devotional service. This taste and attachment, when gradually intensified in the course of time, becomes love. Well, you see, what Prabhupada is doing here, he's actually going through very briefly, the whole process from the beginning. Right in the beginning, you just performing regulative devotional service, but then you progress and some taste comes, ruchi, the level of ruchi. Attachment comes, the level of asakti, which is just before bhava, just before the beginnings of real perfection. Yes, so as these things gradually intensify, they become love. The word love can be actually applied only in relationship with the personality of Godhead. In the material world, love is not applicable at all. What goes on under the name of love in the material world is nothing but lust. Got to remember that. Oh, yes. Okay, so we want to, well, let's read the next paragraph, actually. There's a gulf of difference between love and lust, like the difference between gold and iron. In the Narada Pancharatra, it is clearly stated that when lust is transferred to the Supreme Godhead, and the concept of kinship is completely reposed in Him, such is accepted as pure love of God by great authorities like Bhishma, Prahlad, Uddhava, and Narada. Yeah, love and lust, there's a difference as between gold and iron, and we have a question, one of our special questions here about this. So those of you doing the Bhakti Shastra, you please note this. So the difference between love and lust, like between gold and iron, there's a verse reference, Adi Lila chapter 4, verse 171. Adi Lila chapter 4, verse 171. Which, well, actually, there's a better verse than that too. But anyway, it's okay. Therefore, lust and love are quite different. Lust is like dense darkness, but love is like the bright sun. All right. So there's a question from this. What is lust compared to, and what is love compared to? So all you devotees doing Bhakti Shastri, you please note that. Adi Lila 4, 171. And you have to know what is lust compared to, what is love compared to. So in the second paragraph, which we just read before we looked at this special question, Srila Prabhupada is paraphrasing Srila Rupa Goswami's definition of Prema Bhakti. Srila Rupa Goswami's, yes. Actually, Lord Chaitanya's, in fact. Lord Chaitanya's. From Madhya Lila, chapter 23, verse 7. This is Lord Chaitanya's definition. What is Krishna Prema? Sort of what is it constituted of? I want to read this verse. Samyan mashrinita swanto mamatva tishayankita bhavasa eva sandratma buddhai prema nigadyate. So here's the translation. When that bhava softens the heart completely, becomes endowed with a great feeling of possessiveness in relation to the Lord, and becomes very much condensed and intensified. It is called prema, love of Godhead. Okay, so here's a little analysis of the detail of that verse. There is a primary characteristic of prema from that verse, that it is intensified, condensed bhava. Yes, means greatly. When we were discussing bhava, we read the definition of bhava, and it's like one ray of the sunlight of prema, or it's like the light as the sun is just sort of, coming up a bit, the horizon lights up a bit. It's really different from the full midday sun. So similarly, when it is said that the primary characteristic of prema is, it is intensified, it is the intensified state of bhava. It means really intensified, just in a very big way. And there are two secondary characteristics. One is, it completely softens the heart. You remember what we were saying yesterday? Maharaj Ambarish, he was attacked by a demon created by Devasa Muni. And when that happened, he just pulled himself together and focused on the Lord. And then some ecstatic tears came from his eyes. Some symptoms of bhava manifested because he was on the level of bhava. But before that, the symptoms of bhava had not been there. And after that, they went away. Whereas a devotee on the level of prema, they're just, well, as we said last night, or we referred to nectar of devotion, a heart like nectar is just always liquid, and it's always moving. It's always moving with whatever is happening. Things are always happening. Things are always happening. And as those things are always happening, that the nectar in the heart of nectar, it's always moving. So there's always these, different manifestations of love, like overwhelming manifestations of love, like waves in an ocean, sometimes coming together, sometimes clashing together, and sometimes rolling away. So that's the first secondary characteristic. It completely softens the heart. And second is, which is very interesting, it is marked by highly possessive ownership of Sri Krishna. Mamatva. Mama means my. Krishna uses the term in Bhagavad Gita. Mama maya durachyaya. Mama means my. Mamatva means myness. They're in a general state of feeling that in this case Krishna is mine. Just like, in India, the Hindu activists, they have this term Hindutva. You heard of that? You heard of that one? Not? Sure. It means Hinduness. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Which is in keeping, actually, with a statement here, like in the third paragraph. Well, in the second paragraph we read, the concept of kinship is completely reposed in Krishna. And in the third paragraph, according to Bhishma, well, great authorities like Bhishma have explained that love of Godhead means completely giving up all so-called love for any other person. According to Bhishma, love means reposing one's affection completely upon one person, withdrawing all affinities for any other person. This pure love can be transferred to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Okay, well, we'll get onto that in a minute. The different ways that people can come to the level of prema. But this, in sadhana bhakti, or in any bhakti really, except for prema bhakti, even in the beginnings of bhava bhakti, the idea is, I belong to Krishna. I am Krishna's. I am nobody else's. So I have no one else to serve. And I'm not even mine. At least my body and so on is not mine. They belong to Krishna. So therefore I shouldn't use these things for my enjoyment. I should use them for Krishna's enjoyment. That's in sadhana bhakti like that. But on the level of prema, the devotee thinks, Krishna is mine. A strong feeling of possessiveness. So therefore, Krishna is my son. Krishna is my lover. Krishna is my friend. A very intense feeling of ownership of Krishna. Yes, then here's an interesting thing. This is actually from Rupa Goswami in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu itself, in the section about prema. This is interesting. Bhava is called prema. Bhava is called prema by Bhishma and others, where there is possessiveness related to the Lord, and where possessiveness of other things is absent. This is like a distinguishing point between bhava and prema. Bhava is called prema where there is possessiveness related to the Lord, but where possessiveness of other things is absent. So now, as Prabhupada says at the end of the third paragraph, this pure love can be transferred to the Supreme Personality of Godhead under two conditions: out of ecstasy and out of the causeless mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead Himself. This is it. This is how a person can come from, it would normally mean from bhava, basically from bhava to prema. Just two ways: out of ecstasy and out of the causeless mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Now, we have to clarify this point, though. Ecstasy. I mean, is it just that you just feel blissful, blissful, blissful? What does it mean by ecstasy? Well, ecstasy, of course, is the translation of the word bhava. So in this particular category, or way of coming to prema, what is meant is that the devotee can come from bhava to prema by devotional service on the stage of bhava. Very dedicated devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In other words, it means really through the maturing of bhava, devotional service in which bhava matures and transforms, gradually manifests these different qualities we just read about, and in this way transforms into prema. But now, there are two types of bhava. One type of bhava is bhava reached through Raganuga sadhana bhakti. The other type of bhava is reached through Vaidhi sadhana bhakti. So there are two types of bhava. One is very Vaidhi, rules, regulations, very formal, Vaikuntha approach. And one form of bhava is Raganuga bhava, or it's sort of, Raganuga, but now it's become Ragatmik bhava. So, in other words, when we talk about coming to the level of prema through the maturing of devotional service in bhava, we mean that there are two processes. One is the maturing of Raganuga or Ragatmik. It would be Ragatmik devotional service in bhava. And the other would be the maturing of Vaidhi devotional service in bhava. Is that clear? Yeah? So when we come to this next little section, it's titled Ecstasy, you'll see there are two paragraphs. The first paragraph is discussing about a devotee coming to the level of prema through the maturing of that devotee's devotional service in Vaidhi. Yeah. Whereas the second paragraph is describing the maturing of a devotee's devotional service in bhava, but of the nature of rag. So let's just have a look at those paragraphs and just see how it's working. So there's a verse there in the first paragraph, starting in the middle of the paragraph. A devotee, in the course of executing the regulative principles of devotional service, develops his natural Krishna consciousness, and being thus softened at heart, he chants and dances like a madman. While performing chanting of the holy name of the Lord, he sometimes cries, sometimes talks wildly, sometimes sings, and sometimes, without caring for any outsider, dances like a madman. This is in the course of executing devotional service in bhava, but according to regulative principles. Not that he's just, because he's so blissful as described here, wildly blissful, that he forgets about the regulative principles or the formal considerations. No, they're still there. But sometimes he just goes into a really amazing state of ecstasy, beyond even bhava. Means now he's coming to the level of prema, but via regulated devotional service. Then the second paragraph, this is now a devotee coming to the level of prema through rendering devotional service in the mood of rag, spontaneous attachment, and not rules, regulations, formalities, and respect and all that. So let's just read that. In the Padma Purana, there's a statement about ecstatic love born of spontaneous affection. In other words, raganuga or ragatmik rag, where rag is present. Chandrakanti, a celebrated, fair-faced girl, rigidly observed celibacy in order to obtain Krishna as her husband. So she was thinking of Krishna as her husband. This is rag, because rag obscures everything, obscures the formalities and all these types of things, and focuses simply on the relationship. In this case, it's a conjugal relationship, it would seem, in Dwaraka. So yeah, she always engaged herself in meditating on the transcendental form of the Lord, and always chanted the glories of the Lord. She did not desire to accept anyone else as her husband. She had firmly decided that only Lord Krishna would be her husband. Firmly decided. She was fixed. And in this way, in this mood, she came to the level of prema, and she became a wife of Krishna. One would assume must be in Dwaraka. And it shows her mamatva, her sense of ownership, that Krishna is my husband. That's all. Don't you tell me anything else. That's all. I have no other perspective on the matter. There is a special question here. Look at that. It is in regard to Chaitanya Charitamrita, Antya Lila chapter 7, verse 14. Antya Lila 7:14. Without being especially empowered by Krishna, one cannot manifest ecstatic love of Krishna. For Krishna is the only one who gives ecstatic love. That is the verdict of all revealed scriptures. So that's Chaitanya Charitamrita, Antya Lila, chapter 7, verse 14. And you know what you have to do. The question, you have to know what is the verse number. So that's pretty kind of straightforward. So we go on to the next section, coming to the level of prema by the Lord's extraordinary mercy directly of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So, paragraph 1, example. An example of such extraordinary mercy is given in the 11th canto, 12th chapter, verse 7 of Srimad Bhagavatam, where Lord Krishna tells Uddhava, the gopis in Vrindavan did not study the Vedas to achieve me, nor had they ever been in holy places of pilgrimage, nor did they devoutly execute any regulative principle, nor did they undergo any kind of austerity. It is simply by my association that they have attained the highest perfection of devotional service. In other words, the gopis, at least those who were not already perfect, there are different divisions, different groups of gopis. Some of them, and the main ones, are just eternally perfect associates who descend with the Lord. But then there are others who have just become perfect, or are just becoming perfect even. So they then actually come to the level of total perfection, Krishna Prema, directly by the special mercy of Krishna. Then there's paragraph 2. We're not going to go through the whole thing, but let me just tell you the basic idea is that, actually, as Prabhupada says, in the first sentence from the example of Chandrakanti as found in Padma Purana, and from the example of the gopis as found in Srimad Bhagavatam, it appears that a devotee who always thinks of Krishna and who always chants his glories in ecstatic love, regardless of his condition, will attain the highest perfection of unalloyed devotional love due to Lord Krishna's extraordinary mercy. So, that's the basic point. Always absorbed in thinking of Krishna, then they get Krishna's mercy. Now, then we come to the third paragraph. This is important. There are two types of prema, which would make sense, seeing there are two types of sadhana bhakti, there are two types of bhava bhakti, so there are two types of prema bhakti. There's Vaidhi sadhana bhakti, of course, the practice of regulative devotional service according to rules and regulations. Then there's Raganuga sadhana bhakti, the practice of spontaneous devotional service. Then we just mentioned a few minutes ago, there's also like Vaidhi Bhava Bhakti and Rag or Rag Atmik Bhava Bhakti. And like this, these two types of devotees with quite different types of moods come to the level of prema, and therefore come to two types of prema. There are actually terms which are not, they're given in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. But let's just have a look here in the third paragraph. Spontaneous attraction to Krishna, which is said to be due to the extraordinary mercy of the Lord, can be placed under two headings. One is profound veneration for the greatness of the Lord, and the other is one's being automatically attracted to Krishna without any extraneous consideration. Let me just clarify that. There are two terms, Sanskrit terms. One is Mahatmya Gyan Prema. Mahatmya means glories, glory. Usually it means in the formal sense, just some recitation about how great God is. That's the Mahatmya of the Lord. Mahatmya Gyan, Prema. Prema, which has as its characteristic knowledge of the greatness of the Lord, the greatness, the gloriousness, and like that. And then Kevala Prema. Kevala means pure. It means just like only, like totally focused, unmixed. Kevala means unmixed. Unmixed prema. If someone has Mahatmya Gyan prema, they go to Vaikuntha. But those who have Kevala prema, generally they go to Goloka Vrindavan. So that Kevala prema, well, this is the devotion of the Brijbasis, basically. To some degree, the devotion of some or however many of the residents of Dwarika. Yeah, these people particularly, but most particularly the residents of Vrindavan. So now in the fourth paragraph, this Kevala Prema is described a little further. In the Narada Pancharatra, pure, unalloyed devotional service is explained as being without any motive for personal benefit. If a devotee is continuously in love with Lord Krishna, and his mind is always fixed upon him, that devotional attitude will prove to be the only means of attracting the attention of the Lord. In other words, a Vaishnav who is incessantly thinking of the form of Lord Krishna is to be known as a pure Vaishnav. Now, so the Mahatmya Gyan Prema, is it pure? Well, it's pure. They're pure devotees. Of course they are. They're on the level of Prema. They're living in the spiritual world with the Supreme Lord face to face. But that tendency towards like giving special emphasis to the greatness of the Lord, how powerful he is, how grand he is, how magnificent, how respectable he is, and how we as devotees must respect him, and leading to the formal dealings and all of that. It's not exactly a contamination. You cannot say it's a contamination like it's Maya. It's not Maya. They're free from Maya a long time ago. When they first came to the level of bhava, they were free from Maya. But they're spiritual considerations which reduce the intensity of the love because of spiritual Krishna conscious considerations, not because of some material consideration. That I'm doing nicely, I'm chanting nicely, things are going nicely, and then I see some member of the opposite sex and my mind goes off and I lose that intensity. Here, the intensity is maybe not lost, but it's more like it never comes because of that like attachment, very extremely deep attachment to the glorious nature of the Lord, and then how one should deal with him because of his glorious nature. So it's not a contamination like some material contamination, but it's a Krishna conscious consideration which reduces the intensity of love, and therefore the person goes to Vaikuntha. And would you believe, devotees, we have another special question. Yes, and it is, we are quoting Chaitanya Charitamrita, Antya Leela, chapter 9, verse 108. Antya Leela 9, verse 108. By the mercy of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, one can certainly become spiritually advanced. Indeed, no one can estimate the results of his mercy. Okay. So you're going to be asked a question about that. Antya Leela, chapter 9, verse 108. Aha, okay. And even for that matter, in the following paragraph, number 5, the last paragraph in this little section of the chapter, Prabhupada makes the point that the devotee who has got the causeless mercy of the Lord on account of strict following of rules and regulations becomes attracted to the greatness of the Lord, etc., etc. And in this way, they go to Vaikuntha. Now, let us, there is another section there, which is, it's more, I mean, there is a little bit of information about prema, actually, which is interesting. But otherwise, it's more like a summary of the whole eastern side, everything we've been through in this whole seminar. Let me just, let's go through it bit by bit. The first paragraph is a paraphrasing of Rupa Goswami's 2 famous verses, which are listing out the levels of devotional service. Let me just tell you the verse, 2 verses, and then the actual translation as it appears. If you want to find it, the verse and translation appears, if I remember correctly, in the purport of the last verse of chapter 4 of Bhagavad Gita, as it is. And just to help us, let me just confirm that. That's where you can find this. Let me confirm this. Oops, no, it's not. Here is it. Oh, Krishna. No. Oh, yeah. Oh, I don't know. Where has it gone? Let me just tell you, I'll try and find where you can find this verse. Ado, Shrad. It's in the purport of Bhagavad Gita, chapter 4, verse 10. You'll find these 2 verses. Ado Shraddha Tata Sadhu Sangata Bhajana Kriya Tato Narta Nivritis Tato Nishta Ruchis Tata Ata Saktis Tato Bhavas Tata Prema Budanchati Sadakanam Ayam Premna Prado Bhave Bhavet Krama. In the beginning, one must have a preliminary desire for self-realization. This is Prabhupada's translation from that purport in Bhagavad Gita. This will bring one to the stage of trying to associate with persons who are spiritually elevated. In the next stage, one becomes initiated by an elevated spiritual master, and under his instruction, the neophyte devotee begins the process of devotional service. By execution of devotional service, under the guidance of the spiritual master, one becomes free from all material attachment, attains steadiness and self-realization, and acquires a taste for hearing about the absolute personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. This taste leads one further forward to attachment for Krishna consciousness, which is matured in bhava, or the preliminary stage of transcendental love of God. Real love for God is called prema, the highest perfectional stage of life. So basically, this paragraph here, first paragraph, under association with pure devotees, it's a paraphrasing simply of that. In other words, of the process as we have been studying it for the last, what did we say, 34 days. Now, let's see. In the second paragraph, let's just read it. Srila Rupa okay. This ever-fresh, where are we? What are we doing here? Paragraph 2. What? Oh, where is this from? Okay. Okay, so here's a quote. This is what this is. This is a verse from Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu in this discussion of prema. And it's nice. It talks about an interesting characteristic of a devotee on the level of prema. So Srila Rupa Goswami says, this ever-fresh prema arises in the heart of a person who's very fortunate. That person's behavior is very difficult to comprehend, even for those knowledgeable of scriptures. This is a point which is made elsewhere, that in talking of the characteristics of the devotee on the level of prema, one characteristic is that the devotee is very difficult to understand. Yes, or often very difficult to understand. So then, in the second paragraph, only the most fortunate persons can achieve such success in life. Those who are simply academic students of the Vedic scriptures cannot appreciate how such a development takes place. In the Narada, Sri Radha Radhanath, Sri Giri Govardhan, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Ki Jai. Okay, just sit down, just seriously, two or 3 minutes maximum more. So Lord Shiva tells Parvati then, my dear Supreme Goddess, you may know from me that any person who has developed the ecstasy of love for the Supreme Personality of Godhead and is always merged in transcendental bliss on account of this love cannot even perceive the material distress or happiness coming from the body or mind. In other words, they are just in another state of consciousness altogether. Okay, so let us conclude by reading the last verse last paragraph, Sri Rupa Goswami thus concludes the first division of the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, offering up his treatise for the transcendental pleasure of Sanatana Goswami, who has established the transcendental beauty, and of Gopal Bhatta, Sri Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, and Raghunath Das Goswami. It appears from this statement that the great Srila Jiva Goswami was not yet active when Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu was written. Thus ends the Bhaktivedanta summary study of the first division of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu up to the descriptions of ecstatic love of Godhead, which are to follow next. Srila Prabhupada ki, Sri Nectar of Devotion ki, Hare Krishna.